June counted the stages the way other women counted their blessings, quietly, without making a show of it. 40 times she had stood at the edge of the Harlow Creek depot and watched the morning coach pull out, dust rising behind it like a veil being lifted from something holy. 40 times she had smiled, not the brittle smile she wore for Reverend Aldous on Sundays, but the real one, the private kind that only arrives when a person knows exactly what they are choosing and chooses it anyway. This morning was different. She stood in the same spot, her good wool shawl drawn against the October chill, and she did not smile. She watched the stage rock and sway down the canyon road until it was nothing but a brown smudge dissolving into the cottonwoods, and she felt the absence of that smile like a missing tooth, aware of it with every breath. The letter in her apron pocket was what changed things. She had read it so many times the fold had gone soft and the ink on the crease had begun to gray. Her brother Emmett's hand, scratched out from somewhere east of St. Louis. The Kendall land claim is sold. The back taxes came due and I could not cover them. I am sorry, June. I am truly sorry. Come home if you can, though I know you have never thought of any place as home quite the way you think of those 40 acres. 40 acres of High Creek bottom, red willow along the water, the 3-room house their father had built before the land broke him, hers by inheritance, though she had been boarding in Harlow Creek for 3 years, teaching the schoolhouse children and saving toward the day she could return and make the place viable on her own. The bank had other ideas, $340 in back taxes, and Emmett had let them go without a word until the gavel fell. June Kendall was 31 years old. She had a trunk, a teaching certificate, $47 in a tin box under her boarding house bed, and land she no longer owned. She turned from the empty road and walked back toward town, and it was only then that she noticed the man sitting on the depot bench. He was long in the legs and quiet in the way that some men are quiet, not shy but deliberate, as if he found no use in spending words before he knew whether they were needed. He had a battered traveling case at his feet and a hat worn straight across, not tilted the way the younger hands wore theirs. He was watching the road where the stage had gone. June noticed, because she was a noticing sort of woman, that he had not tried to catch that stage. The man sitting on the Harlow Creek depot bench was named Silas Croft, and he had arrived on the westbound 3 days prior with no particular intention of staying more than a night. He had a sum of money, earned honestly from 4 years of contract work clearing timber for the Sorensen mill operation up in the Clearwater country. He had a bill of sale for 80 acres of creek bottom ground 6 miles south of Harlow Creek, purchased sight unseen from a land office agent in Boise who had assured him the soil was good and the water rights were attached. He had a battered surveying compass, a decent axe, and the kind of bone-deep tiredness that comes not from hard work, but from years of working beside men he could never quite trust. He was 37. He had never married. He had come close once, in the way a man comes close to a fire and then pulls back when he feels the heat. He was not looking for a wife. What he had found, upon riding out to inspect his 80 acres on the second morning, was a 3-room house in reasonable repair, a collapsed root cellar, and a surveyor's marker that confirmed, with quiet finality, that 20 of his 80 acres overlapped with land that the Harlow Creek Savings and Loan was currently trying to sell to a grazing operation out of Twin Falls. The land agent in Boise had been, in the gentlest possible construction, imprecise. Silas was not a man who shouted. He had sat on his horse in the thin October light and looked at the marker and at the house and at the red willows lining the creek and calculated what he could do about it. The answer, after a night of thinking, was not enough alone. He needed someone who knew that land, someone who might have standing. He had asked at the general store and been told, without much ceremony, that the Kendall place had been in arrears and was now bank property. but that June Kendall, the teacher, had grown up there and might know more of its history than anyone. He had been told this by Mrs. Pratt, the storekeeper's wife, who had added without being asked that Miss Kendall was unmarried and sensible, and not the sort to be made a fool of, so he ought to mind how he came at her. He had taken that instruction seriously. He looked up when he heard boots on the depot platform and saw a woman walking toward him with the kind of posture that comes from years of making herself credible to people inclined to dismiss her. Dark hair, worn shawl, eyes that were doing the same inventory of him that he was doing of her, and making no effort to pretend otherwise. She stopped 3 feet away. "You didn't take the stage," she said. "No," he said. "Neither did I." She looked at him steadily. "Mrs. Pratt told me a man named Croft was asking after the Kendall deed history. That you?" "It is." She sat down on the far end of the bench, which he found he appreciated. No performance in it. "Then we have a problem in common," she said, "and I'd like to know whether that makes us adversaries or something more practical." He looked at her for a moment. "I'd prefer practical," he said. "So would I." She pulled the letter from her apron pocket, unfolded it, and held it out. "Read that. Then tell me what you found at the property." He read it without comment, folded it back precisely as he had found it, and returned it. Then he told her about the overlapping claim, the surveyor's marker, the land agent in Boise. He told it straight, no softening. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The root cellar collapsed the winter before I left. I should have told Emmett to shore it up, but I thought I was coming back sooner." She said it without apology, just accounting. "The water rights were registered in my father's name in 1879. I have the original document in my trunk." Silas looked at the road. That document would matter considerably in a dispute with the grazing company. "Yes," she said, "it would." She let that sit in the air between them. "You have the deed, and I have the water rights. Separately, we have half a case. Together, we might have a whole one." "That is my thinking," he said. She folded her hands in her lap. "I am not in a position to take on a legal partner in any conventional sense. I am a school teacher with $47. "I'm not looking for a legal partner," Silas said. He said it carefully. "I'm looking for a practical arrangement, something that gives us both standing." June looked at him directly. She had a teacher's capacity for letting silence do the work a question might fumble. She waited. "A marriage would do it," he said. "Legally. The water rights would attach to the deed under joint ownership. The bank couldn't sell out from under a settled claim with an established household." The word hung there in the cold morning air. Marriage. June turned it over the way she'd turn a stone at the creek, looking for what lived underneath. "You are a stranger," she said. "I don't know your character." "That's fair. Mrs. Pratt knows my character well enough to have warned you about me, which suggests," she looked into it some. The corner of June's mouth moved. "She warned me not to be made a fool." "I don't make fools of women," Silas said. He said it without heat, the way a man states a fact he has never had reason to question. "I would want separate sleeping arrangements until such time as both parties chose otherwise. If they chose otherwise at all, I would want the terms written down. You would have full authority over the house and the school work. I would work the land and handle the legal dispute. Whatever comes of the place after, we divide by the same arrangement we begin with. Equal parts, documented." June sat with that for a long moment. A magpie landed on the depot rail and cocked its head at them and flew away. "Why didn't you take the stage?" she asked. "Because I don't leave problems," he said. "I finish them." She looked at the empty road. Then she said, "I have conditions of my own." "I expect you do," he said. The conditions took the better part of an hour to settle. June wrote them in her schoolteacher's hand on the back of an old receipt Mrs. Pratt supplied without much pretense of not listening. Silas read each one, asked 2 questions, and agreed to all of them. They walked to Reverend Aldis's study that same afternoon. The Reverend was a practical man who had seen harder bargains made in worse weather, and he married them quietly with Mrs. Pratt and her husband as witnesses before the supper hour. June Croft. She tried the name in her head once and then set it aside to examine later, when she had the privacy for it. The house was colder than she remembered. She stood in the main room on the first evening with her shawl still on and looked at what 3 years of vacancy had done to her father's work. A window pane was cracked. The stove needed new rope packing. The floor near the east wall had gone soft, which meant the ground underneath had shifted. There was a smell of mouse and old ash and, beneath both, something she recognized, the particular dust of a house that had been lived in by people she loved. Silas set her trunk down by the bedroom door and stood in the room with her and looked at it without comment. "It needs work," June said. "Most things worth keeping do," he said. She turned to look at him. In the thin light he seemed taller than he had at the depot, or perhaps just more present. He had taken his hat off. His hair was dark brown going gray at the temples, and his face had the kind of settled plainness that she associated with men who had never relied on their looks for anything. "I'll start on the stove tomorrow," he said. "Tonight the fireplace is sufficient. There's dried beans in the supply pack and a side of bacon I bought from the store." She moved to the kitchen end of the room, because action was easier than standing still in an unfamiliar version of a familiar place. "Sit if you want, or don't. I don't require company while I cook. I'll bring in wood," he said. He brought in enough wood for 3 days. She noticed that. A man who had only intended to stay the night would have brought in enough for one. She said nothing about it, but she noticed. They ate the beans and bacon at the small table with a kerosene lamp between them and spoke carefully about the legal matter, what documents she had, what he knew of the land agent's current whereabouts, what the proper sequence of filing would be. It was practical conversation, the kind that leaves no room for anything awkward. She found she was grateful for that, and then found she was grateful that he seemed to understand she was grateful, without needing her to say so. When she cleared the dishes, he said, "Thank you for supper." "We both need to eat," she said. "It's not a favor." "No," he said, "but it's not nothing either." She went to bed in her father's old room and lay in the dark and listened to the creak and to the sounds of Silas banking the fire for the night, and she thought, "I have made a bargain." She had made bargains before. She knew how to honor one. Whether the other party would honor it in kind was the only remaining question, and she had, after $47 and a water rights document and a very long morning, decided to bet that he would. The first 2 weeks were an education in each other's edges. June learned that Silas rose before light and preferred to work through the cold hours and rest in the heat of the afternoon. She learned that he ate whatever was put in front of him without complaint, but that he had no tolerance for waste, scraping every bowl clean and returning bones to the pot without being asked. She learned that he fixed things without announcing he was going to fix them. The window pane appeared whole on the 3rd morning, the soft floor on the 8th, and that he did not wait for praise when the work was done. Silas learned that June was not soft. He had known that from the depot bench, but he learned the specific texture of it. She kept the schoolroom accounts in a ruled journal with a precision that would have made a bank examiner envious. She corrected his spelling once, on the legal filing, without embarrassment and without cruelty, circling the error and handing the paper back. He found he respected that more than he'd expected. He also learned that she sang while she cooked, not performatively but the way people breathe, without thinking about it, old songs mostly, the kind that knew what loneliness was and didn't dress it up. The external threat came from the direction June had expected, though sooner than she had hoped. A man named Heber Voss arrived on behalf of the Twin Falls Grazing Company on a Tuesday in early November, riding a good horse and wearing a coat that said he was used to people deferring to him. He knocked on the door and presented himself with a courteous smile and a letter from the Harlow Creek Savings and Loan stating that the 20 disputed acres were under contract for sale and that any claims to the contrary would need to be settled in the county court. June answered the door. She read the letter. She said, "Wait here," and closed the door, which she could see surprised him. Silas was at the workbench in the lean-to, squaring timber for the root cellar repair. She came to him and showed him the letter and told him what she thought. "The water rights registration predates the bank's claim by 16 years, she said. "If we file with the county recorder today, before he can move any further, we force the question onto record, rather than letting them manage it quietly." Silas looked at the letter. "Today's Tuesday," he said. "Recorder's office is open until 4. Then we have 3 hours. "I'll saddle the horses," he said. She went back to the door and told Heber Voss that they would be in touch through the county recorder's office and that he was welcome to speak with their attorney. They did not have an attorney yet. She said it calmly, the way she announced arithmetic facts to 12-year-olds. Voss smiled again, the patient kind. "Ma'am, I'd encourage you and your husband to think carefully before—" "We have thought carefully," June said. "That is what we've been doing. Good day, Mr. Voss." She closed the door again. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not quite, but she held it firm. The ride to Harlow Creek was fast and cold. The cottonwoods were bare now, gray-silver in the November light, and the road had a skim of frost in the shadows. Silas set a pace she could match without difficulty, which she noted. She had ridden with men who made a point of riding ahead. At the county recorder's office, a young man named Finch, who seemed to find legal disputes mildly interesting, examined the water rights document with great care, compared it to the bank's registered claim, and confirmed that the Kendall registration did in fact predate and supersede the bank's authority to include water access in any sale of the disputed parcels. The land question was murkier, he said, and would require a formal survey and a judge's ruling. But the water issue was, in his opinion, clear. "The grazing company can't run cattle without guaranteed water," June said to Silas on the steps afterward. "No," he said, "they can't." He was quiet for a moment. "You handled Voss well." "I teach children all day," she said. "I know how to manage a man who's used to getting his way by waiting people out." Silas looked at her. In the pale November light she looked very much herself. Composed, a little tired, not asking for anything. He thought of what it had cost her to stand at that depot 40 times and watch the stage leave toward someplace easier. "You never wanted to go," he said. Not a question, more like something he was setting down somewhere he could find it again. "I always wanted to stay," she said. "Those are different things." He held that for the ride home. She was right. They were different things entirely. The cold that moved in after the Voss visit was a working cold, the kind that doesn't ease until March, and doesn't apologize for that. The county court had their filing. The grazing company's attorney sent 2 letters that Silas answered with the help of a real attorney in Twin Falls, a fee that cost him 60 of the timber money, and was worth every cent. Heber Voss came once more, and was received by Silas alone, at the door, with the particular quality of stillness that some men can produce when they want to make clear that a conversation is already over. Voss looked at him for a moment and then said, with somewhat less courteous a smile, "You understand, this will go to court." "I do," Silas said. "We'll be there." He closed the door. The fire was going. June was at the table with her schoolroom accounts, her hair down from its pins because she only pinned it for public, and she looked up from the journal. "He's going to court," Silas said. "Good," she said. "The recorder's confirmation will be filed before any hearing date. He has no water without our consent, and we will not be consenting." She went back to her journal. "There is stew on the stove." He stood in the room for a moment with the cold still on him from the door, and watched her write, and something in him that had been braced for a long time settled slightly, the way a timber settles when the joint is properly fitted. He had lived beside people his whole life and rarely felt less alone than he did standing in this room. He went and got the stew. The second chair appeared on a Wednesday in mid-December. June came in from the schoolhouse and found it beside the fire. Not her chair, which was narrow and straight-backed, the one she'd brought from her boarding room, but a wider one with a curved top rail, made from the same timber Silas had been working in the lean-to. It fit the hearth side the way furniture fits a room when someone has stood in that room and thought about it. She set her bag down and stood looking at it. Silas was at the workbench. She could hear the sound of the plane through the wall. She hung her coat and her shawl, and she sat in the new chair and felt the solid fit of it and understood, without needing it explained, that the chair was not part of any contract. There was no clause in the agreement about chairs. She sat there until supper, grading a set of spelling papers, and when Silas came in and washed his hands at the basin, she did not make a ceremony of the chair. She said, "Sit with me after supper." He looked at the chair and then at her. "All right," he said. They sat by the fire after supper with the lamp turned low, and she read and he worked a piece of leather he was mending, and outside the wind came off the high ground and pressed against the windows, and the house held. June looked up from her book at one point and watched the firelight on his hands. Careful hands, she had come to understand. Hands that did not hurry and did not fumble, and she thought, "This is a thing I did not put in the contract, this specific quality of quiet, this particular person in it." She looked back at her book. In January, the court scheduled a hearing for March, and the attorney in Twin Falls wrote that the water rights case was strong and the land boundary question increasingly favorable, given that the Boise land agent had turned out to be imprecise, with at least 2 other buyers in the same survey district. The letter made Silas laugh, briefly, a low sound she had heard perhaps 4 times in 3 months. She found she was always glad to hear it. The hearing was held on the 14th of March, and June sat beside Silas in the county courtroom in Harlow Creek, with the original water rights document in her hands, and the cold March light coming through the high windows, and the judge, an elderly man named Carver who looked as though he had heard every kind of human trouble and was tired of the unnecessary sort, read through the submissions for 20 minutes without speaking. He ruled in their favor on the water. On the land boundary, he ordered a proper survey at the grazing company's expense. Heber Voss's attorney accepted both rulings with the face of a man eating something he didn't choose from the menu. June and Silas walked out of the courtroom into the cold March air, and she stopped on the steps and looked at the sky, which was the particular pale blue of early spring, the kind that promises things. "We won the important part," she said. "We did," he said. She turned to look at him. Silas. She said his name the way she had not let herself say it before, simply, directly, without the careful distance she had maintained since October. "I want to stay." "You've always wanted to stay," he said. He was looking at her steadily, with that deliberate quality, the not shy kind of quiet. "I mean, with the arrangement," she held his gaze. "With you, I would like to choose it again. Not because of the deed or the water rights or the county court, because I find She stopped. She was not a woman who fumbled for words, but the right ones required some care. "I find that the house is different when you're in it, and I would like that to continue." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I built the chair in November." "I know," she said. "I knew before November," he said. "I was being careful." She looked at him. "You can stop being careful," she said. He reached over and took her hand, the way a man takes something he has decided he is allowed to keep. His hand was warm. She had not expected that, in March, in the cold. They stood on the courthouse steps in Harlow Creek in the first real light of spring, and the stage rolled past on the main street below them, heading south. June watched it go. She did not count it. She did not need to anymore. Some bargains are made in desperation, and some in wisdom, and the wisest ones are the kind where both people bring what the other lacks, not because they planned it that way, but because a hard season has a way of showing you exactly what you're missing. June brought the history of the land and the standing in the county and the $47 and the courage to close a door on a man twice her confidence. Silas brought the deed and the timber money and the patience of a person who has decided that something is worth the time. Together they made a case no court could easily dissolve and a home no winter could entirely take. The second chair by the fire was worth more than any contract written on the back of a receipt, because it was given freely, with no clause attached and no repayment expected. That is the truest kind of bargain there is. If this story settled something in you tonight, leave a word below. Tell us what you'd have done, standing at that depot, watching the stage leave one more time. And if you'd like more stories from the old frontier, from the people who stayed when leaving would have been easier, subscribe, and we'll bring you another journey next week. Good night. God bless you, and may every house you live in hold you the way a good chair holds a tired person, solid and chosen and built to last.